If you've ever felt invisible, this story might speak to you. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. And sometimes by the time we find our voice again, it's too late to use it the way we always dreamed we would. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I've never told this story before, not completely. But sitting here in my small apartment, looking at the one thing I've kept from that time in my life, I think it's finally time to let it out. Maybe someone needs to hear it. Maybe I need to say it. The thing I'm holding is a small wooden radio. It's old, probably worth nothing to anyone else. The paint is chipped, the antenna is bent, and it hasn't worked in decades. But when I touch it, I'm 16 again, and I remember what it felt like to believe in myself, even if it was just for a moment. I was born in 1951, the youngest of 3 children in a house where my father's word was law and my mother's silence was survival. My father worked at the steel mill, came home with dirt under his fingernails and anger in his chest. He was the kind of man who believed children should be seen and not heard, especially daughters. My mother, God rest her soul, was a woman who had learned to make herself small. But I wasn't small. I was loud, curious, always asking questions. I wanted to know why the sky changed colors at sunset, why birds knew how to fly south, why some people had more money than others. I wanted to understand everything, and I wasn't afraid to say so. The first time I remember feeling truly afraid was when I was 12. I had gotten into trouble at school for arguing with my teacher about something I'd read in a book. She'd said something about how certain people were just born to certain positions in life, and I'd raised my hand and said I thought that was wrong. When my father found out, he didn't just yell. He hit me across the face and told me that smart-mouthed girls end up alone and unwanted. That night, I lay in bed with my cheek still stinging, and I promised myself I would prove him wrong. I would show him that being smart, being curious, being myself was not something to be ashamed of. For 4 years, I carried that promise like a secret flame. I studied harder than anyone in my class. I read books from the library until my eyes hurt. I wrote stories and poems in a notebook I hid under my mattress. I wasn't just learning. I was preparing. I was going to leave that house, go to college, become someone who mattered. Then I turned 16 and everything changed. There was a boy at school named David. He was popular, handsome, from a family that owned the hardware store downtown. He was also cruel in the way that only certain teenage boys can be. He would make jokes about girls' bodies, spread rumors, make other kids feel small just because he could. One day in the school cafeteria, he was picking on a girl named Sarah, calling her names because she was overweight. The whole table was laughing. Sarah was crying, and something inside me just broke open. I stood up and told him to stop. I told him he was acting like a coward and a bully. I told him that making other people feel bad didn't make him bigger, it made him smaller. I said it loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. The room went quiet. David's face turned red. And then he said something that I'll never forget. He looked me right in the eyes and said, "At least I'm not some trailer trash girl who thinks she's better than everyone else." I should have walked away. I should have let it go. But I was 16 and I was angry, and I had 4 years of my father's voice in my head telling me I was nothing. So I did something I'd never done before. I slapped him. Not hard. Not even hard enough to really hurt. But hard enough for everyone to see. Hard enough for the principal to get involved. Hard enough for David's parents to call mine. When I got home that afternoon, my father was waiting for me in the living room. He was sitting in his chair, the one none of us were allowed to sit in, and his face was darker than I'd ever seen it. My mother was standing behind him, her hands twisted together, not looking at me. "Margaret," he said, and his voice was very quiet. "Come here." I walked over to him, and he stood up. He was a big man, my father. Broad shoulders, thick hands, the kind of presence that filled a room. When he looked down at me, I felt like I was shrinking. "The Hendersons called," he said. "They told me what you did to their boy." I started to explain, to tell him about Sarah, about how David had been cruel, about how someone had to stand up for her. But he held up his hand. "I don't want to hear it," he said. "I don't want to hear your excuses or your explanations. What I want to know is how I raised a daughter who thinks it's acceptable to put her hands on a boy from a respectable family." "But Dad," he was The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My head snapped to the side and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. When I looked back at him, his face was cold. "You have brought shame on this family," he said. "The whole town is talking about it." People are saying we can't control our own daughter. They're saying we raised a wild girl, a troublemaker. I touched my cheek where he'd hit me. It was the same spot he'd hit 4 years earlier, and it felt like a circle closing. I want you to pack your things, he said. Tonight. You're going to stay with your Aunt Martha in Oregon until you learn how to behave like a proper young lady. I looked at my mother, hoping she would say something, anything. But she just stood there, her eyes on the floor. For how long? I asked. For as long as it takes, he said. Maybe a year. Maybe longer. However long it takes for people to forget what you did and for you to learn your place. That night, I packed my clothes into a small suitcase. I packed my books, my notebook of stories, my dreams of college. I packed them knowing I might never see my room again, might never finish high school with my friends, might never get the chance to prove I was more than my father believed I could be. The next morning, my mother drove me to the bus station. We sat in the car for a few minutes before the bus arrived, and I kept hoping she would say something. That she would tell me she was proud of me for standing up for Sarah. That she would tell me I didn't deserve this. That she would tell me to come home when I was ready. But all she said was, "Write to us when you get there." I climbed onto that Greyhound bus with my suitcase and my broken heart, and I watched my town disappear through the window. I was 16 years old, and I felt like my life was over. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever felt abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you, please know you're not alone. Leave a comment and let me know. Sometimes just knowing someone else has been there makes all the difference. Aunt Martha lived in a small town outside of Portland in a house that smelled like lavender and old books. She was my mother's sister, but she was everything my mother wasn't. She was loud where my mother was quiet, independent where my mother was dependent, strong where my mother was fragile. The first thing she said when she saw me getting off the bus was, "Well, you look like hell." I started to cry then, right there on the platform. All the tears I'd held back for the past week came pouring out. Martha just stood there and let me cry, and when I was done, she picked up my suitcase and said, "Come on. Let's get you home." Her house was small but warm. She had books everywhere, plants in every window, and a kitchen that always smelled like something good was cooking. She lived alone, had never married, and when I asked her why, she said, "Never found a man who could keep up with me." For the first few weeks I was angry. Angry at my father for sending me away, angry at my mother for letting him, angry at David for being cruel, angry at myself for caring so much about what anyone thought. I wrote long, furious letters to my parents that I never sent. I wrote stories about girls who ran away and never looked back. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes burned. Martha never told me to stop being angry. She never told me to forgive and forget. She just let me feel what I needed to feel, and slowly, something inside me began to heal. She enrolled me in the local high school, and I threw myself into my studies with the same intensity I'd always had. I joined the debate team, the school newspaper, the drama club. I was determined to prove that being sent away hadn't broken me. That's when I met him. Thomas. He was in my English class, a quiet boy with dark hair and kind eyes who always sat in the back row. He wrote poetry, read books that weren't assigned, and had this way of looking at the world like he was seeing it for the first time. When he smiled, which wasn't often, it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. We started talking after class about books and ideas and dreams. He told me he wanted to be a writer, and I told him I wanted to be a journalist. We would sit in the library after school, doing homework but mostly just talking, sharing the kinds of thoughts you can only share with someone who really sees you. He was the first person who made me feel like being smart wasn't something to hide. He listened to my ideas like they mattered. He read my stories and told me they were good, not just good for a girl, but good, period. With him, I started to believe in myself again. It was Thomas who gave me the radio. He'd found it at a thrift store, fixed it up and surprised me with it one afternoon. "Now you can listen to the news," he said. "Future journalists need to stay informed." I kept that radio on my bedside table, and every night I would tune into stations from all over the country, listening to different voices, different stories, different perspectives. It became my window to the world I wanted to join. Thomas and I were inseparable that year. We studied together, dreamed together, planned our futures together. He was going to apply to universities with good writing programs. I was going to apply to journalism schools. We were going to change the world one story at a time. I wrote to my parents regularly, as I'd promised. I told them about school, about my grades, about how well I was doing. I didn't mention Thomas, didn't mention how happy I was, didn't mention that I was starting to think I might never want to come home. My father's letters back were short and cold. He would tell me about the weather, about my siblings, about people in town. He never asked how I was feeling. He never said he missed me. He never said he was proud of me. But in the spring of my junior year, something changed. My mother wrote me a letter that was longer than usual. She told me that my father had been talking about me coming home for senior year. She said he thought I had learned my lesson, and that it was time for me to finish high school where I belonged. I read that letter sitting on Martha's porch, and I felt something close to panic. I had built a life in Oregon. I had Thomas, I had dreams, I had a version of myself that I actually liked. The thought of going back to my father's house, to his rules, to his disappointment felt like dying. That night I talked to Thomas about it. We were sitting by the river that ran through town, the radio playing softly between us. I told him about the letter, about my father's plans, about how scared I was to go back. "Then don't go," he said simply. "I have to," I said. "I'm not 18 yet. I don't have a choice." He was quiet for a long moment and then he said, "Maybe you do have a choice. Maybe not going back isn't the only option." I looked at him, not understanding. "Marry me," he said. I stared at him. We were 17 years old. We were children, really, even though we felt so grown up. "I'm serious," he said. "I love you, Margaret. I've loved you since the first day you raised your hand in English class and argued with Mrs. Patterson about symbolism in poetry. I want to spend my life with you. I want to write stories about strong women because I know one. I want to support your dreams because they're beautiful dreams." I started to cry then, but they were different tears than I'd cried in months. They were tears of possibility, of hope, of being seen and loved for exactly who I was. "We could get married this summer," he said. "Before your father expects you home. We could both apply to colleges, find a way to make it work. We could build a life together." I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was 17 and in love and tired of being afraid. We spent the next few weeks planning. We would graduate in June, get married in July, and start college in the fall. Martha helped us look at schools, helped us figure out scholarships and applications. She never once told us we were too young or too naive. She just supported us the way families should. I wrote to my parents and told them about Thomas, about our plans, about how happy I was. I told them I wanted them to come to the wedding, that I wanted them to meet the man who loved me and believed in me. My father's response came 2 weeks later. It was the longest letter he'd ever written me, and every word felt like a knife. He told me I was selfish and ungrateful. He told me I had been sent away to learn humility and respect, not to find ways to embarrass the family further. He told me that if I married Thomas, I would be dead to him. He told me that no daughter of his would throw away her reputation and her family's name for some boy she barely knew. And then at the end of the letter, he wrote the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "If you choose him over your family, don't ever come home. You will have no father, no mother, no siblings. You will be alone in this world, and you will deserve it." I showed the letter to Thomas, and he held me while I cried. He told me it would be okay, that we would build our own family, that love was stronger than fear. But something had changed in me. That letter had reached into the deepest part of my heart, and found the scared little girl who just wanted her father to love her. It had found the part of me that had never stopped hoping he would be proud of me someday. Let me know in the comments if you've ever held on to something, or someone, longer than you should have. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we can't seem to let go of. I started having second thoughts. Not about Thomas, not about my love for him, but about what it would cost me. Was I strong enough to live the rest of my life without my family? Was I brave enough to choose love over the approval I'd been chasing my whole life? Thomas could see me pulling away, and it broke his heart. He would find me staring out the window, lost in thought, and he would ask what was wrong. I would tell him nothing, but we both knew that wasn't true. 3 weeks before graduation, I made a decision that I've regretted every day since. I told Thomas the first needed time to think. I told him that maybe we were too young, that maybe we should wait until after college, that maybe rushing into marriage wasn't the right choice. He looked at me with those kind eyes that had seen right through me from the beginning, and he said, "This isn't about us being too young. This is about your father's letter." I couldn't lie to him. I nodded and I watched something break in his face. "I thought you were braver than this," he said quietly. "I am brave," I said, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. "You're not," he said. You're still that scared little girl who just wants her daddy to love her. And you're willing to give up everything real and beautiful in your life to chase something that's never going to happen. He was right and I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself. I was 17 years old and I was terrified of being alone in the world. We graduated 2 weeks later. Thomas barely looked at me during the ceremony. I kept the radio he'd given me, but I packed it away in my suitcase, unable to bear listening to it. I wrote to my parents and told them I was ready to come home. I told them that I had learned my lesson, that I understood now what was important. I told them I was sorry for disappointing them. My father's response was short. Come home. We'll discuss your future when you get here. I left Oregon on a Greyhound bus just like I'd arrived. Martha drove me to the station, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked disappointed in me. You're making a mistake, she said. I'm going home, I said. No, she said. You're running away from home. There's a difference. I climbed onto that bus with my suitcase and my broken heart, and I watched Oregon disappear through the window. I was 17 years old and I felt like my life was over. When I got home, nothing had changed. My father was still cold, my mother was still silent, and I was still the disappointment who had to earn her place in the family. I finished my senior year at my old high school, where everyone remembered what I'd done to David Henderson. I kept my head down, made good grades, and applied to colleges close to home. I got accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship. I was going to study journalism just like I'd always planned, but when I told my father, he said I couldn't go. We can't afford it, he said. And besides, you've already proven you can't handle being away from home. You'll stay here and find a job. I argued with him, showed him the scholarship letter, explained that I could work part-time to pay for the rest. But he wouldn't listen. He said I was being selfish again, thinking only of myself instead of what was best for the family. So I got a job at the local newspaper, answering phones and filing papers. It wasn't reporting, but it was something. I told myself it was temporary, that I would save money and go to college later. But later never came. My father got sick when I was 21, and I was expected to help take care of him. When he died 2 years later, I was expected to take care of my mother. When she died 10 years after that, I was 33 years old and had never left home again. I spent the next 40 years of my life working at that newspaper, watching other people's stories get told while mine stayed locked inside me. I never married, never had children, never traveled farther than the next county over. I lived in the same house where I'd been told I was nothing, surrounded by the same people who remembered me as the girl who couldn't control herself. But I kept the radio. Through all those years, through all that silence, I kept Thomas's radio. I never turned it on, never listened to it, but I kept it. It sat on my dresser like a reminder of the life I could have had, the person I could have been. Last month, I was cleaning out my mother's things when I found a box of letters in her closet. They were tied with a ribbon, and when I opened them, I realized they were from Thomas. He had written to me. For 3 years after I left Oregon, he had written to me. Letter after letter telling me about college, about his writing, about how much he missed me. He had kept applying to the same schools I'd applied to, hoping we could still find a way to be together. He had sent me poems, short stories, news clippings about things he thought I'd find interesting. He had never stopped believing in me, even after I'd stopped believing in myself. The last letter was dated 1972. In it, he told me he was getting married to someone else. He said he would always love me, would always wonder what our life could have been. He said he hoped I was happy, hoped I was living the dreams we'd shared. And then at the end he wrote, I still have the radio, the one that matched yours. Sometimes I turn it on and listen to the news and I think about the girl who was going to change the world. I hope she's out there somewhere still fighting. My mother had hidden those letters from me for 50 years. She had watched me live half a life, watched me sacrifice my dreams for a family that never appreciated the sacrifice, and she had never said a word. I looked up Thomas online. He had become a writer, just like he'd planned. He had published novels, won awards, taught at universities. He had lived the life we both dreamed of. He had died 5 years ago, survived by his wife and 2 children. I sat in my mother's empty house, holding those letters and that old radio, and I cried for the girl I used to be. I cried for the life I'd given up, for the love I'd walked away from, for the dreams I buried to earn approval that never came. I'm 73 years old now. I live alone in a small apartment, and I spend my days reading books I should have read 50 years ago. I turn on Thomas's radio every morning, and I listen to the news, to the stories, to the voices of people who weren't afraid to speak up. I never changed the world like I thought I would. I never became the person I dreamed of being. But I learned something important, something I wish I could tell that scared 17-year-old girl. The people who love you don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to be small or quiet or grateful. They love you because you're brave enough to be yourself, even when being yourself is hard. I think about Thomas every day. I think about the life we could have built together, the stories we could have told, the love we could have shared. I think about the girl who stood up to a bully, who slapped a boy who deserved it, who was brave enough to argue with her teacher about justice. I wish I could tell her that being sent away wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. It was a chance to become who she really was, away from the people who wanted her to be smaller. I wish I could tell her that love is worth fighting for, even when it's scary. That dreams are worth chasing, even when other people don't understand them. That the voice inside her head that says she's not good enough is wrong, and the voice that says she's brave and smart and worthy of love is right. I wish I could tell her that she doesn't need anyone's permission to be herself. But I can't go back. I can't change the choices I made or the life I lived. All I can do is sit here with this old radio, listening to the world I never joined, and hope that somewhere out there, there's another 16-year-old girl who's braver than I was. If this touched your heart, if you've ever felt like you gave up on yourself too soon, don't forget to subscribe and support these true stories being told. And remember, it's never too late to start believing in yourself again. Even if you're 73, sitting in a small apartment with nothing but memories and regrets, you can still choose to be brave. The radio is playing now. I can hear voices from all over the world, people telling their stories, people who weren't afraid to speak up. And for the first time in 50 years, I'm listening not with sadness, but with something that feels almost like hope. Maybe it's not too late after all. Maybe there's still time to find my voice, to tell my story, to be the person I was always meant to be. Maybe this is how it begins,